Hello again. Welcome back to our program, Meet Your Neighbor and Know Your Neighbor. And I have a neighbor now, Harry Chase, Reverend Harry Chase, who many of you in Englewood certainly would know. Harry, for many, many years, was a minister at the First Presbyterian Church on Palisade Avenue. Harry's had a diversified career from First Presbyterian. He moved on to Tenafly as a minister there. And Harry is now associated with a group in Pascack Valley Hospital, the hospice group. Harry, the hospice group, hospice is a word and a name that increasingly is familiar to many people in the public, and yet it's also a word and a name that people don't recognize, don't know what hospice is. Could you tell us a little about the activity?
It is of recent vintage. Hospice as a concept and as a process and as a location started in England about 15 or 16 years ago. And in England, a hospice is a caring of the patient in a particular place. In America, hospice is a way of caring for the patient, usually in the home and with a team of experts.
I have two questions, Harry. First, the word hospice sounds to me like it's related to the word hospital. Is there a relationship there, or is that just coincidental?
There is a relationship, and I suppose the word began somewhere in the 15th or 16th century.
With hospitality or
the Hospitallers, the people in the Middle East, people who were on the scene at the time of the Crusades, people who cared for those who were ill and injured and near dying, and that became the Hospitallers, and out of there came hospitals and a concept of hospice, which is care.
Harry, you used the word patient. And my knowledge or my association with the term in our culture here in America is patient who is terminally ill. Are the two synonymous?
When I use the term hospice and the term patient together, hospice does deal with patients who have a life expectancy of about 6 months.
So we're dealing then with the terminally ill.
Hospice deals with the terminally ill and provides palliative care rather than curative care, because hospitals are involved in doing curative care. They have therapy and they hope to help the patient get well.
So the hospital sees the patient coming in but walking out.
Yes.
In a healthy condition.
That's right. And when medicine and surgery and therapy and chemistry and pharmacology have done all they can for the patient, then the patient deserves the opportunity to die with dignity, with comfort, with freedom from pain, with control of symptoms as much as possible.
Let's deal just for a moment with what is my vision of death, and I think it's the common or the popular vision. When we think of the word death, particularly in relation to ourselves or a loved one, there is great trepidation, there's great fear, there's great anxiety, there is a kind of horror, there's a kind of shock. It certainly is not a pleasant thought.
No.
That is not the thought or the association that someone like yourself or your colleagues who work with hospice really have. I'm not saying you see death as pleasant.
No, but we see it as an affirmative, positive experience.
You see it as part of the life process.
Exactly. And toward which life is moving and for which life should prepare us, and toward which we would like to have people move with what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross came to describe as the positive acceptance of that next experience, which is death.
When you think of what we do in education, in our society, in our culture, we educate people to understand the classics and Shakespeare. We educate people to become mechanics. We educate people to become accountants. We educate people to become artists or artisans or laborers. In some cases, in the schools, we educate people to learn how to cook, home economics. We certainly teach health. Sexuality is now a part of the curriculum. But as yet, we really don't, in the very early years, talk about death or the end of life to young children.
That is true. Our culture has now removed us from that experience, which was once upon a time much more immediate. When you think about people once upon a time living on the farm, living with animals, living in a way that took care of one another with nearby burial sites and so on, death was a very imminent event. But now our society has us living some distance away. We live away from farms, we live away from funeral homes, we live away from cemeteries, and we live away from hospitals. So that when somebody characteristically goes to the hospital, they go some distance from home, and there's removal, removal, removal. And that removes us from the experience, and you're quite right. And we have not really addressed that, so that when we have a patient who is now confronted with the ultimate life-ending experience, we have a great deal of help to give to that person who has not thought about it in positive terms or immediate terms.
Then the people involved in hospice, the people really involved in death and the death days, have thought, do think, and have brought a not only positive but bring a presence to death which is not apprehensive, which is not really threatening.
That is true. Not only have they thought about it, but in most instances they have lived with it, they have lived through it, they know the anguish, they know the experience of pain and loss and grief and bereavement. They also know the acceptance of life and the acceptance of the end of life, and the positive values to having an accepting attitude toward that. That is what we want to bring with the whole hospice team, which is, as you know, a social worker, nurses, coordinators, medical director, chaplain, to bring all of the resources of all of those people to a given patient and the patient's family. The family is integrally involved in the care that hospice provides.
Just bringing the origins and the genesis of hospice back and looking at it where it started in other societies, or even in our society when we encountered death. For example, you mentioned people on a farm who are remote and isolated. Certainly on the farm, one decade, generations ago, had to deal with terminal illness. A person could become comatose on a farm. You may have experience here or not, but those families were better able to handle the death process, say, of a loved one who was comatose or a loved one who was immobilized. And other cultures, by the way, I would think we can look for prototypes there that give us some understanding of how other cultures and other societies handle this process.
Well, the whole scene is different, Phil. And part of the difference on the scene is that the people to whom you were just referring had very limited options. How many choices did they have when a condition or an emergency such as the coma or the stroke or the injury or the amputation or the imminent death occurred? Very limited choices and options. We now expect that A, we have many choices and options, B, we expect to have things available to help people, correct conditions, and make people better. We expect to solve problems because we have more choices, more medicine, more technology, more people, more everything, and why can't we make it better? So we expect to get the people well, and we have therefore a greater resistance to accepting the necessity of death.
Harry, this demand or this expectation of why can't we make the people well at some point is almost childish. It's
Philip,
reaching out for a non-obtainable goal.
Philip, I have to tell you that when it comes to emotional experience, all of us are children. And we all long for that which we love. We all want to keep that which we cherish. We never want to lose the one we love. And if there's any way to postpone, avoid death, we want to do it.
Harry, why don't we take a look at the team, the people who work with you, understand a little better what each of them do and how they are integrated and bring the service, the hospice service, to the community.
Good. They're a great team. Take a look at them.
Good. We'll look at that in just a moment. And stay with us now. We'll switch over and show you the hospice team in action.
Thank you, Phil. We are happy to be here tonight, and we are very fortunate to have with us a new volunteer who has many questions that she would like to have answered. Kay?
Thank you, Reverend. I would like to ask Pat, what does hospice do?
Well, hospice is a program that provides services and palliative care to patients that are terminally ill. We help their families keep them at home during their terminal illness. by providing the care that they need and helping the families care for these patients.
Excellent.
Now, would this be mostly like cancer patients who are terminally ill?
Well, Reverend Chase, it could be anyone with a terminal illness. It could be someone with end-stage cardiac disease, end-stage pulmonary disease, ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, as well as cancer.
I see. So then this is a total program of care for the patient and the family? Does the family get in here?
The family is very, very much involved. Hospice does care for both patients and families. We follow families for 13 months after the death of the patient in bereavement.
Does the social worker get involved in this aspect of it?
The social worker is involved in family assessments, which involved what the family needs are in terms of keeping this patient at home, their social and emotional supports, what kinds of financial resources they have. We do volunteer placement to help with respite, and we also do bereavement follow-up.
You have quite an extensive program. But the patient is still a patient and
Yes.
needs medical attention and medical care, and that's a large part of your work.
Well, the nurse will go in as the first person from the hospice team and assess the problems that are going on at the time. We do a long interview with the family and with the patient, and try and find out ways that we can help
Medically.
with pain control, with symptom control, whether or not they have a clergyman such as yourself, if they'd like us to contact one.
Now, do you develop any kind of plan that is followed in the care of this patient
Yes.
and the family?
We have an individualized plan for each family, each patient and each family, and we discuss it weekly at our hospice team meetings.
Ah, so this team meets every week.
Yes,
Yes.
it does.
Beginning to get a picture of what hospice
Yes,
does,
I
Kate?
am. I would like to know, and I'm sure many of the listeners would also like to know, is how is hospice paid for
Well,
this service?
most insurances now cover hospice care as a part of their health insurance. Medicare in particular has a Medicare hospice benefit, which pays for the care of a patient during their terminal illness for a period of approximately 6 months. If
So you have a-
someone has no insurance, we do have a sliding scale, and if we have to, we will provide care for nothing if need be for people that are unable to pay for this kind of care.
So financing comes partly from their insurance coverage, partly from Medicare, partly from maybe the resources or the willingness of hospice to reduce its fees, and whatever else their families may want to do
That's correct.
for them. I see.
Now, does the social worker get involved with the families with hospice?
In terms of finances? Or
Not so much finance, but maybe
or
help.
counseling?
Right.
We do some counseling, related to the terminal illness and the family's coping mechanisms. We're trying to find out what they can and can't tolerate in terms of their care. Then we tailor the care plan, the nurse's care plan, the team, interdisciplinary team has a care plan that's focused on what this family's strengths and weaknesses are and where we can support the strengths and supplement the weaknesses. That's what
Now,
we're
I
trying to do.
understand Pat said there is a bereavement. Now, maybe I'm jumping ahead, but I would like to know a little bit about the bereavement program that you have also.
Well, primarily what we try to do is contact the bereaved family within 4 weeks of after the death, by phone or in person, primarily with the nurse arrived making contact to see how the family's coping. We try to go to as many funerals as we can go to, as many wakes, to be part of what we've been through with the family. We continue after that with what we call a bereavement correspondence, which is an educational resource for the family members. And it talks about grief and bereavement and what's involved with your feelings, coping mechanisms that you can use. We offer bereavement groups, which are also educational and supportive. We refer people individually if they're having a hard time with the post-death reaction and adjustment.
And volunteers are an
Yeah,
important part of our bereavement
Yes,
program also.
I have learned that in the program, that I
Used
am a
quite
volunteer.
effectively.
Yes. Now, what do you do if the patient dies? Is there some procedure you follow to help the families when the patient dies?
We tell the family to call us first, and the nurse will go out to the home and follow a procedure from the house.
I see.
But the family is informed beforehand of what to do.
And sometimes they need religious assistance at that point
Yes.
also. Most of our patients and families, we've discovered, are connected to some religious congregation, some fellowship, some church. Most of them have that intact. And we will advise their pastor if they haven't already told the pastor, and we will assist them in every way we can to get the kind of spiritual support that they and the family are in need of at that time. Once in a while we find a family who has no spiritual connection with any organized institution. And one of the roles of the hospice chaplain will be to minister to that family as their pastor during that period of time, and to work with them and to support them, once again in concert with the social worker and with the nurse and with the coordinator, in terms of what does this family need at this time and how are their needs being met as the days go by.
Now, there's one question I think most people would like to know also is, when should a patient be referred to a hospice program?
Well, as early as possible so that we can help them. We like to get to know the patients and the families so that they trust us and that we get to know what kinds of needs that they have. I would say, Kay, that we'd like to be referred when active treatment has stopped, when the need for palliative care begins.
And they also can keep their own doctor in this case.
Oh,
Is
very
that right?
definitely, yes.
We can have more than one referral source, too. The family can call a physician, anybody in the community.
Anybody in the community
Yes.
can suggest a
Initiate the
person for hospice care.
Yes,
Oh, their pastor could do this.
absolutely.
The next door neighbor,
Absolutely.
a family member.
Anybody.
Doesn't have to be a physician.
No.
Thank you.
Now, I know hospice always looks for volunteers, and I think that volunteering is one of the big things, and I really feel that there should be plenty of people volunteering for something like this. Can you tell me, do you do a training for the volunteers? And I think
certainly
Roberta,
do. And Roberta's the
Roberta,
one
I
that's been
think,
doing
has
it.
the one that can answer that.
We do an extensive training, an 8-week training that involves the general overall philosophy of hospice. We talk about medical needs of the hospice patient, and we have our medical team come in and talk with our volunteers. We talk about your own personal death awareness, being
It's an
comfortable.
introspective look at
Exactly.
yourself.
Yes,
right?
exactly. You know, it's just a time when you can look internally and feel comfortable with what you're going to see. We do our spiritual aspects of hospice. We try to teach and educate our hospice volunteers about what our service is so that they in turn are comfortable with our families. We help them learn about family dynamics and listening skills, which are so important with dying patients and their families who are stressed, and we need special skills in that respect. And at the end of that time, we graduate our volunteers and we put them into the line of fire. They then
It's a
have
very
patients.
rewarding experience, I must say.
You have found this
Yes,
rewarding.
I have found it very rewarding, and I hope that you'll have many, many more volunteers.
Marilyn, in terms of being the nurse for hospice and working so closely with these patients, over a period of time, do you find that you get very close to the patients and to
Yes.
their families?
Very close.
You develop a real warm
You're really
relationship?
allowed to be part of that family unit many times, and you become part of the family in a sense. And it's very rewarding, and it's also very painful.
It must be sometimes at a loss, a
Yes.
time when someone does die whom you've been able to get close to.
Yes.
But I guess we've all felt that, haven't we, just as a member of the team?
But I think the support groups that they have here for all of the staff are great help for all of us, because as a volunteer sometimes it's very hard to deal with it. As professionals, you know that you can handle it well, but volunteers sometimes have it much more difficult. But I really feel that everyone has done such a great job. They have done a great job.
Well, we learn a lot from our families. They really teach us how to give to the next family and give to the next patient. So we're really getting something from this.
Do you find that many of our volunteers, such as Kay, come from families whom we have ministered to and who have seen hospice in action for them?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
That's one of the great sources.
Yes,
it is.
Yes, it's a great inspiration to them to come back and give back to hospice, which they do by volunteering.
Many people working in hospice have experienced a loss themselves, and perhaps it makes them more caring, more feeling. I don't know.
A real empathy for the person who's suffering then.
That's right.
Thank you. Thank you again for letting us be here. And we invite a call from you, should you stand in need of hospice care.
Harry, now we've seen the people that you work with. You have a group of 4 or 5 people who work on a continuing basis as a group, as an integrated team. My assumption is when you encounter a case or a patient for the first time, you do a workup, a diagnostic workup with the team about the circumstances, the situation of the family, what the obstacles are, and what the positives are.
Yes, and there is an assessment which is done by both the social worker and by the nurse. And there's a medical assessment of the patient and the patient's needs, and there's an assessment of the family, its strengths, its weaknesses, its needs, its hopes, its limitations, and the attempt to work with those.
So when the team is assigned a new case, a patient is brought to the attention of the team, either 1 or 2 people contact the family and go out and profile the situation.
That's right. That's right. Usually first the nurse. And she will be particularly interested in the patient's needs, symptoms, the need for pain control, symptom control, and then close on her heels, if not at the same time, the social worker to assist the family in marshaling their resources. Do they have financial limitation? Is there home care limitation? Is there someone in the family who can care for the patient at home? Most hospice work is done with the patient at home.
Now, Harry, obviously the nurse has also talked and has worked closely with the physician.
Yes.
And in many cases where we're dealing with a malignancy, we're talking about the oncologist. In some cases, then, the patient might still be in the hospital preparing to come home because the physician has made the judgment that continuing hospitalization might be fruitless, to of no avail. But I also understand in the little encounter I've had with the hospice situation, increasingly we're recognizing that it's not only more humane, but the final days of the patient will be, I'm going to use a strange word now, jovial or better or happier. Greater contentment will be found in the home situation with loved ones rather than the institutional situation of those austere hospital settings.
Not only austere, but the hospital...
Impersonal.
Yes, that could be a word used, but I would rather say that the hospital necessarily has to have a structure for its own functioning and for its effectiveness and its efficiency. Whereas if the patient is at home, the patient certainly feels as though he has more control over his existence, over his circumstance, and can elicit much more quickly sympathetic and affectionate help from those around him. The father, the mother, the sister, the brother, the family member, the neighbor, the caretaker, the longtime friend, all of these people begin to figure very importantly, and they have a greater emotional investment in the patient.
Just a little digression. Last week, 10 days ago, I gave blood for a relative of a friend over in New York, Memorial, Sloan Kettering. And I went up to say hello to the young man, 20-year-old man who has a serious case of leukemia. And I remember my emotions walking into the room just to say hello. I was cautioned that I couldn't come too close for fear of contamination. The bacteria I carry, we all carry. But I remember the hesitancy I had in even approaching that young man, going near a person who was close to being terminally ill. And I can visualize the hesitation that the family friend, the grocer, or whoever, the plumber, whoever comes into the house might have about being in close to a person who is terminally ill.
Oh, you're quite right. And as a matter of fact, it is that pattern of avoidance that first attracted the interest and the curiosity of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who did that wonderful monumental work on death and dying. And that is
by the way,
such a good...
that's a popular book in soft paperback that is available for the viewer.
Oh, yes, you can pick this up in paperback, and I urge you to do it. Whether you have a patient in your family or not, buy this book and read it because it will help you understand so many aspects of life, crisis, tragedy, and death. But it was this pattern of avoidance, and we in hospice are very aware of that, and therefore we think it's very important that we on a hospice team make it a point to become as closely related to the patient and to the patient's family as we can, because they need all of the love and support and warmth and proximity and human interest that can possibly be summoned. You see, we die one by one, Philip. We die one by one. and it can be a lonely experience. But it can be a positive experience if we have the experience and the feeling that we are surrounded and supported and cared for by those who love us and who will always love us. That's a part of what hospice brings. I bring it as a chaplain, somebody brings it as a nurse, somebody brings it as a social worker, somebody brings it as the medical director, somebody brings it as a coordinator, and the volunteers whom we bring in. All of these people function as a team of support that says we care about you and we want to minimize the pain, control the symptoms, make this a dignified experience, one that is befitting your humanity and one that does not denigrate you in any way.
Harry, I had a number of motivations in producing this program with you, and I thank you for your help. I know how time-consuming it's been, and I've cut into your very busy schedule. But I hope the program will be of great service to the viewers and the people who see it in terms of coming to grips with this very, very difficult topic of death, which we all sometimes face, and death of loved ones. The American society is a fascinating society in that we develop technology and we develop resources, and as you said, we fight and deny the inevitable. Our view is that everybody is entitled to the epitome of the technology to save life, regardless whether that person is the president or the person who does the lowest level of work on the socioeconomic ladder. The reality is that we've built the technology, but we can't afford to offer this to everybody on an institutional basis. You know, a hospital stay now can be in excess of $1,000 a day. So I see the reality that the society ultimately will spread the hospice philosophy and methodology into many families, and it will function on all levels in many, many communities which don't have it today.
That is true, and it's interesting to notice that at the same time you are having this feeling, there is a general American return to the home, and we call it a return to basics, but there's a return to the home and hearth and family and caring for, and hospice aids in doing that. And you're right, the expense of providing care can be great. Hospice can ameliorate this and reduce this to a great degree, and communities that do not have hospice would be greatly helped if they could develop their own local hospice team.
Well, Harry, our viewing area, we have many small towns in Bergen County. People are watching this program from Cliffside Park and Little Ferry and Leonia and Fort Lee, Guttenberg. Your team functions out of Pascack Valley Hospital. Some of these towns may not. I know Englewood Hospital has a hospice program going. I believe Holy Name has a hospice program going.
Hackensack Medical Center has a very extensive hospice program, okay, and Hackensack Hospital serves a very wide area.
But it may very well be that some of the smaller towns, or it may very well be that ultimately we're going to see develop in our area and in America a hospice junior program, auxiliary program, or spin-off.
Hospice would welcome the development of hospice teams with, I would say, every hospital in every community, because in every hospital death occurs, and with every patient there's a family in need of help.
So certainly if any of our viewers want to contact you, you'd be happy to share with them the philosophy, the structure, how to get it started.
Yes, you can contact us through the Pascack Valley Hospital. You can contact us through the Bergen Community Healthcare. And if you want a phone number, I'll be glad to give you that.
Please do the
358-2900.
And that's Reverend Harry Chase. It's an easy name, C-H-A-S-E, Reverend Harry Chase. At that telephone number again, Harry?
358-2900. And we will be happy to help you as a patient, you as a family, you as an interested community resident who wants to bring hospice to where you live.
Harry, thank you so much for being here and being with me and doing the program. We really have enjoyed it.
Well, you do a lot of volunteer work also, and we appreciate this opportunity.
Good, Harry. We'll
Thank you.
see each other soon again. Good night. Stay well.